Let's do a quick how-to on installing this optional speed gear in the Xmaxx. I think I can do the whole job with just these Allen wrenches. The optional high-speed gear that comes with the Xmaxx is a spur gear, and it's attached to the slipper clutch. So it's a 54 tooth spur gear in the truck from the factory. This is a 46 tooth. First, we'll take the dust cover off using a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench, 2 screws, so you just take it out like that with the screws in it. Now we'll have to pull the motor to get the pinion gear clear of the spur gear. 4 screws right here. These also require a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench. So you have to hold the motor from falling out as you take the last of the screws out. Now we should be able to lift the motor clear. Might have to, yeah, these are to undo the motor wires instead of fighting with them. And it looks like we have wires to take off going to the fan. So it looks like there's wires going to the fan, and there's also the wire for the temperature sensor, and it appears like I can just set the motor right there without unhooking the wires. And now I want to take this cover off to pull this spur gear and slipper clutch. So 4 screws here, using a 2.5 millimeter wrench, take this cover off. So again, I'm going to attempt to leave all the screws in that cover and just lift this entire unit out without dropping any of these screws. Like that. So it looks like there's 2 short screws on that side, 2 long screws on this side holding the cover on. Got some bearings, another gear here. We can just leave this together. We want to change out this gear right here. Swap this out. Now we have to remove these 3 screws here using a 2 millimeter wrench. Get the 3 screws out. Pop this 54 tooth 40 mile an hour out of the box spur gear off this assembly. And now we'll put the optional 46 tooth spur gear on, and you look where these 3 screws are, and you look at these 3 pockets, you line them up, and this is quite a bit tighter fit, but that's what you line up. The 3 screws come into them pockets, and put these screws back in, and the spur gear is changed out. And this whole time I was still holding this together so I don't lose that pin. It's holding the bearing on while I was working on it. So there's the 46 tooth spur gear installed. To put this back in the truck, there's a pocket that captures this bearing right here. Pocket back here that captures the rear bearing. So don't let this tip that way or your bearing and your gear will fall off. Simply drop that back in the truck. So gears like grease, I just have marine grease, small tube for grease gun I have. This will pretty much last me for my entire modeling career. A little grease in here. We'll turn this over, work it in. Let's go back and forth, get that worked in those two gears. A little grease on our new spur gear. Now we'll replace the cover. See if I can do this with all the screws in place. Drop them screws in there and line them up. Back to the 2.5 millimeter wrench. Tighten all four of these screws down. Careful not to over tighten screws in plastic. You can feel when they kind of squeak a little bit, get seated, and then a little bit of a squeak. Any more than that, you're just ripping threads out of plastic. A little wipe, got some extra grease on the cover. Okay, spur gear is in and greased, and now we'll look at this chart with the pins in it for locating the motor to get the gear mesh. For reference, I'm on the left side of the truck. It's the front of the truck. Here's the chart for the pins. Looks complicated, but it's really very simple. We are now running the 18 tooth pinion, 46 tooth spur gear. These pins go in position E. So both pins go here and here. And here's how simple it works. Take the motor now, pick it up, turn it as if it's in the truck. We're pulling both of those in to these inner holes, these rows of pinholes being at an angle. It just moves the motor closer to the smaller spur gear. So let's put these pins in location E. Now I have both pins in the E location. Now it's a simple matter of dropping the motor in. This pin should line up the spur mesh closer. Not sure if that dropped onto those pins yet. Looks like it. So now we'll flip the truck over, put the screws, the 4 screws in. Alright, I got one screw started. which keeps the motor from falling out. It's a matter of installing the other 3 screws. Okay, all the screws are tight, and I'll show you that you can see that the motor has moved closer to the spur gear to set the gear mesh. Looking down in these slots, you can see where the screws are actually tightening down on the plastic. The 54 tooth gear? Yeah, the original 54 tooth gear. So these have slid the full length of that pocket, aligning the motor closer to the smaller spur gear. Let's get this big boy flipped over, and I'll show you the mesh on the gears that I now have. Right now I'm working the grease in. Bring the camera closer, you can check out this gear mesh. This looks really good to me, just letting the pins automatically set the gear mesh. If I hold my finger on the pinion gear, take the slack out of it, just rock the truck back and forth, I'm watching the spur gear, that little bit of backlash movement each way. It's like a nice mesh to me. Spare gear is changed, it's greased, everything is tight. Simple matter of installing my dust cover with the screws in the cover. Drop it in here like this, snap it down in place, and these screws back in here. Button this job up. Get this thing out and see what kind of performance we get with the high-speed gear. I think it's going to really wake this truck up. Okay, looks like I got it. Don't forget to plug the wires, the motor wires back in. Drop my batteries in. These are fully charged. See how the 5,000 milliamp hour battery packs handle high-speed gearing. I'll go easy on it. Feels to me like they perform amazingly well. They recommend 6,700 milliamp hour batteries with the high-speed gear. It appears to me like the 5,000s can handle it. So there it is. High-speed gearing, 50 mile an hour gearing in the Xmaxx. Get this baby out, see how she does. See if I can get a backflip out of her. Enough wheel speed. Pull a backflip off on the 45-degree ramp.